So Jesus was questioned. He was questioned by people that were trying to they were trying to trap him into getting him to teach something wrong. Right? They were hoping that they could pin this false teachings, the false doctrine. They were trying to trap Jesus, and they said, what do you think is the greatest commandment of all of the laws? And he says this. He says, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind. Right? The first and greatest commandment is to love God, to love people, and to love, actually, then he goes on, the second is what? Just like it. It says, love your neighbor as yourself. So Jesus unpacks this thing. He says these are equally important, that there's loving God with all of me, there's loving people, and there's loving people as I love myself. There's this understanding that we must love ourselves in order to love people. Or actually, if we really think about it, we actually need to be able to love ourselves in order to love God. Right? If I have a false understanding or perception of who I am, if there's these insecurities in my life, oftentimes those things prevent me from being able to act and move and behave and interact with people in a healthy manner, right? So I have this hard time loving people if I am so hung up on the things that I don't like about myself, or that I'm insecure about myself, or whatever that may be. And so Jesus is saying all of these things are connected. And so it's the greatest. It's the greatest thing that we can put our time and our energy into is to love God, love people, love self. Jesus commands us to love God with all of our heart, with all of our soul, and with all of our mind. So there's this story of a young lady. She's a teenager. She's 18 years old. In 1996, there's this event that took place. Her name's Keisha Thomas. And the KKK, how many of you know what the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, how many of you are familiar? You've heard about this group of people before, right? It's this racist group of people that do not like African Americans, and they have done all sorts of things, all sorts of hate for many, many years. They were holding a rally in a town called Ann Arbor. We know where Ann Arbor is, right? And so this young lady is from Michigan. And if you didn't know that the KKK have a very strong presence in Michigan, in fact, not too far from where many of us live. And so in 1996, they held a rally in Ann Arbor, which is kind of ironic because Ann Arbor is a very progressive and liberal place to be, and mindset that this KKK finds themselves in. Anyhow, they hold this rally, and all of a sudden, a riot breaks out. And there's this man who's wearing a Confederate flag shirt, and he's caught himself in the middle of this crowd, and they begin to chase him down, and they're chasing after him. He falls, and then they begin to beat him and kick him, and they all had their picket signs because they were protesting this rally that the KKK was holding, and they were beating him. And Keisha Thomas ran in, this 18-year-old African-American young lady, and she jumped on him in order to save and protect him. There's a picture of it right here. And this man was potentially in a place where he was going to find himself either severely injured or even beaten to death, and yet she jumps in. And so all last week we talked about this idea that society and culture puts people into categories. And in this picture, you have two categories. You have a white man who has a whole bunch of hatred for another particular category, and the other category would be an African American woman, and she doesn't see the hate or the category. She simply, in a selfless way, jumps in and saves and protects him. It's a beautiful act of love, putting herself second. And Jesus says we need to love others, and he modeled this in the story where we talked last week, where there's this woman who was a Samaritan, and she was getting water, and he didn't see her category. He didn't see the fact that she was from the Samaritan people that the Jews hated, that they didn't like. He didn't see that category, and he also didn't see the category that she's a woman and that male Jewish men wouldn't have conversations with them. And he entered into her story, and he showed her love, and there was this beautiful thing that took place. Like we talked about this idea that loving others is to move out of this category mindset and to begin to see people as humans that have beating hearts and have stories just like each and every single one of us. There's something common that we all have in the room. We all have a story we're living. And some of us feel the freedom to share those stories with each other, and some of us don't. We keep things hidden down, but the reality is that all of us have something we're living through and pushing through. And may we begin to see people as we see ourselves, and not how the world is categorizing them. In John chapter 13, Jesus says this. We talked about this last week. Jesus says, a new command I give you. He says, to love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. And I love how it ends. It says, by this everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. So it's incredible to really think about that. You don't have any... Jesus is not asking you to defend the things that you believe with fancy words or an argument or a lot of knowledge. He's essentially saying the world will know that you are a follower of Jesus. People will know that God is real. People will know that Jesus is real by how we love people, how we love one another. It's pretty amazing if you think about it. It's just simply a way of doing life. The world will know the life-changing story of Jesus when we love others. So that's love others. So earlier in the week, on Tuesday, my wife and I went on like a little outing, all right? And she had been planning this for a while, where through her school purchased 60 tickets for the teachers to take their spouses to this dinner. And this dinner was at a Greek Orthodox monastery in Harper Woods, so just next to Detroit. And she knows that I like history, I like old stuff, I like ancient stuff, I like church history. Like, she's thinking this would be probably something that you would enjoy. And to kind of start things, they have a very fine dining restaurant, and it's free. So we're like, sweet, we couldn't afford it, but we can go for free, right? So she's got this whole thing planned. Now, here's the thing. As she's telling me this, she's excited. Maybe you can relate to this, where someone is sharing something with you, and they're super excited to tell you, and I don't share that enthusiasm inside. Right? Because all I'm thinking about is that, sweet, we're going to go hang out with a bunch of people I don't know, and I'm going to have to small talk for hours, which I don't like. I have a little bit of social anxiety, so when you get into a large room, I'm like, shoot, what do? I got to go to the bathroom real quick, right? Like, I got to get out of this, evacuate. And so I'm thinking, there's no way. Like, I have no desire to do this. However, like, I appreciate the fact that she's planned this. She's thought this is something cool. She's thinking of me. And so I say, sure, let's go ahead and do this, right? And so we make the long drive. We pull in, and we realize that it was supposed to start with a tour of this monastery, which would have been kind of cool. At least I thought it would be. And instead, change of plans, we sit down in the restaurant part, and you walk into a room, and I feel like we were last ones there almost, and so the room is full, and there's all these tables, and I'm thinking maybe, just maybe, we'll get a table just for us, right? Nope. That didn't happen. So there was all these tables, and you could kind of pick your spot with a bunch of people that I don't know. And so we found this table. It's kind of long. It's got probably 8 people sitting at it already, and there's 2 spots at the end. So her and I were sitting across from each other. And right away, I'm like, this is going to be miserable, right? I had no hopes that this was going to be an enjoyable experience at all. And so we sit down, and immediately, like, I'm thinking to myself, like, we're probably going to introduce, right? And I'm getting ready to. No one cared that I was there, like, at all, right? I was like, sweet, right? This is cool. So then, to make matters worse, there's this woman sitting next to me. So I'm on the end, sitting across the table from my wife, right? And there's this woman sitting next to me, and she's like, so she's here, and I'm here, right? You got this? Like, she's right here. And she literally was like, whoop, and then was talking like this the whole time. I'm like, what do you do with that, right? So, I'm literally sitting at this table, and she like, the whole table, I felt like they were ignoring me. Now, I don't know if that was true, but I felt like she was just ignoring me the entire time. It was kind of funny, because at times, I'd be sitting there, and I was just, like, staring off. There was this window behind my wife, and it was, like, the courtyard, and it was actually kind of enjoyable and peaceful to look at, and I was just staring off. Like, probably looked really weird, really strange, but super antisocial. Anyhow, so I'm just staring off through this window, and there was every now and then she'd catch my eye, and she was like, I'm so sorry. Right? She just knew that I was, like, in misery. Well, finally, we ate the food. We go through the tour. The tour was extremely mediocre, and we left, and I was like, wow, that was awesome. That's sarcasm. right? But why do I do these things? Why do we do these things? So to rewind to the beginning of the story, even though there was things that I didn't want to do, even though there was things that I was anticipating that kind of like rub against my personality, I said yes, and I didn't let on to the fact that I didn't want to be there because I knew that she wanted me to go, and she cared about it. And when you love people, you care about the things that they care about. Right? Like when you really love someone, when you really care about someone, you care about the things that they care about. And so in order for me to show my love for my wife, I just said, I'll do it, I'll go, and I didn't even let on to the fact that I didn't want to be there at all. There's this passage, because in this moment we're talking about loving God. And so we talked about this many weeks ago, loving God. What does that look like? We love God with all of our heart. And so in this passage in Psalm, it says, take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. It's this idea that if I delight in the things that God delights in, if I delight in him, if I care about the things that God cares about, he will then give me the desires of my heart. So there's this interesting transaction you can look at, you can glean from in this passage. That if I really do care about the things that God cares about, he says, I will give you the desires of your heart. In order for me to really love God, I must care about what God cares about. And we unpacked that a number of weeks ago. And then in John chapter 15, and this is where we're going to kind of settle for the evening. In verse 5, it says, I am the vine and you are the branches, and if you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit, and apart from me, you can do nothing. And so Jesus is essentially saying that I am the vine and you are the branches. He's saying that you need to stay connected to me. And as we do, we will bear much fruit. Like Jesus will grow us into a people that people want to be around. Because if we look at other parts of the scripture and they're talking about what these fruit are, it's things like kindness and selflessness and the ability to love people and forgive people and have mercy and grace and all these wonderful things. And Jesus is saying that the more that I am connected to him, the more that I can stay connected to Jesus, to God, the more that I will bear fruit. But he says, apart from me, you can do nothing. And Jesus states we can do nothing unless we remain in him. We stay connected. We love ourselves when we love or when we stay connected to God. Like we must think of this way. That if you really do love yourself, we will stay connected to God. Why? Why? Because Jesus says that as we do that, he gives us, like, life becomes full. But why? Why is it, if I stay connected to God, that's an example of me loving myself. And it's because apart from that, I can do nothing. What Jesus is essentially saying is that what ends up happening when we're disconnected from God. Here, I'll just share a story. Maybe that'll help. So, about a year ago, last fall, I was in a place with my work. I wasn't working here. I was I was in a place in my work where there was a lot of stress. There was a lot of things going on. There was some really tough situations with some people that we were navigating. It was very heavy. It created a lot of anxiety in me. I also have some really, really challenging things going on in my home. Last week I talked a little bit about my oldest son who's got some special needs. Well, there's a whole dynamic there that I haven't shared and haven't talked about, but there's some really intense, it's been a really intense journey with him. And it was kind of all coming to a head, and I kind of lived in this place in my life where I felt like I could do it all on my own. Like I just kind of had the tough guy attitude, that I didn't need anyone. I could just push through it on my own. I could do it on my own strength, and it was getting to be too much. I don't know if you've ever been there, where you feel like you've had hard times and hard moments, and there's like a lot going on, and you think you can just do it and push through it, and you begin to feel some sort of anxiety because of it. Maybe become overwhelmed. And I remember with this particular morning, I decided I'd go for a run. And so I used to run a lot more. Now I just like run to the bathroom if I have to go really bad. But that's about it. I should run more because I'd probably lose some weight. But anyway, I used to run a lot more often. And even in this particular time, it was kind of on the tail end of me getting out of the habit. I probably ran like a couple of times a week. But it's something that when I do it, not only do I like burn calories and like fat goes away, but it also does something to my like psychological well-being. Like I get out and I begin to like breathe fresh. And when I run, I live up in Lake Orion, and so there's a number of like parks where trails through the woods and things like that. And so when I get out, I go over there and so that I can run through the woods. And there's something about that experience that breathes life into me. All of a sudden, life slows down, and I kind of begin to forget about all the stressors and all the things that are overwhelming me. And really, what's overwhelming me at the time is just the need to breathe, right? Because you're just like, you're running and you're running and you're running. But everything begins to slow down, and I can look around and I can see like some sort of peace in the midst of it all. And I remember running and probably getting about a mile in, and I was thinking through all of these things that are going on in my life, and I was feeling overwhelmed. And then God reminded me of something. He reminded me of a moment in my life when we were living in Mexico, and there was a moment just like that where I was feeling overwhelmed, and then God did something, and he answered a prayer, and I was reminded that God is with me. But here's the issue. God was probably sharing that with me all along, and I wasn't listening, and I wasn't hearing him. And so this is where I'm going. All right, I want you to catch this. Every single person in this room, God has created you and made you to understand him in a unique way. All right? So it may be different from the person sitting next to you. But God has wired you and made you, and he's hardwired into you a language that you can understand. When he speaks it, you understand it. But here's the challenge. Just because I have the ability to hear God more clearly when I get out into the woods and I go for a hike, it doesn't mean I'm going to hear him if I don't do that. Right? If I don't do it regularly, if I don't get out and do that more often, then I'm not going to find myself in a place where I can hear God as clearly. And I don't know if you can relate to this, but there's been many times in my life where I will say things out loud and say things in my head like, I just don't hear God saying this. I don't know where his voice is at. And maybe you hear people in your life saying, God told me this thing, and you're probably thinking to yourself, well, I don't ever hear God. I don't hear him like I heard that other person say the other day. Like that sounds fascinating, but it'd be cool if that happened to me. And so the question for all of us tonight is to really be asking ourselves, what is this language? You see, because when we're not speaking the same language, what happens? We don't understand each other, do we? There's this time in Mexico, I did mission work for a while, and I was teaching in a prison in Mexico. All right, so I won't go into the full story, but I was teaching at a church. So it's in Mexico, just across the border. It's in a big city called Matamoros. It's about 1 million people, and this prison in Mexico is run by the drug cartels. All right, so it's not run by the government. It's not run by the police. In fact, some of the police are involved in the drug cartel. Even some of the guards that work in the prison, they are in relationship with the cartel. And so the drug cartel, or lack of a better word, maybe a different word if you want to understand. If you're wondering what a cartel is, a gang. All right, so you have all these gangs. And in this particular prison, there's probably a half dozen different gangs that are running this. And when you get put into prison, this cartel, the one that's running it, right, and they're all always kind of at war with each other, they would then go to your family and they would ask and figure out what you did for a living and what that income and what kind of income you brought into the home. And then they would attach a wage to you based on the income that you made outside of prison. And then you would be required to earn that wage inside of prison. Now I know that kind of sounds weird, like how do you make money in jail? There's plenty of ways to make money in a Mexican prison. You can let your mind wander, all right? But there's also some really different things, like interesting ways, like there's stores and you can sell snacks, or there's a barber and he can give you a haircut or shave, or there's people that make things like rocking chairs, and that means they have sharp objects, and you're thinking, why am I in a Mexican prison when they have sharp objects like in their pocket? Right? This is crazy. So anyway, I taught in that environment. They had a church on their grounds, and I would go there and I would teach in a Bible college, and there was these men who felt called to be pastors, and so they were going to this Bible college. And when I first started going, this was like the year one when I was working in Mexico, and so my Spanish was very limited, and I probably spoke more like a 4-year-old when it came to Spanish. right? So there was no way that I could really fully understand everything that was being communicated to me, and there was no way that I could really teach people from the Bible just using my Spanish, because it would be very limited. And so I needed a translator. But I remember having a conversation with a gentleman one day, and he was talking to me about how the prison works. And this is where I got some of this information that I just shared with you. And one of the things he communicated to me is he said, if the cartel ever wanted something from you, they just take it. And I'm like, really? Like, what if it's in the parking lot? Yeah, they figured that out. They said, for example, if they wanted your truck, they would just take your truck. And if they felt like you were going to do something with that information that could potentially screw something up for them, they would just get rid of you. How would they do that? I asked. Well, they would just put you in a barrel. See, what happened is that if you messed up in prison, there was, I don't know if you are familiar with this, many of you may, but there's if you live in the country, you have these. A septic tank and a septic field. A septic tank is where all your poo goes, all right? And then the field is kind of where it drains out, right? Well, they had a bunch of these in the back part of the property of the prison, and so all of the sewage would just kind of flow into the tanks and then flow into the field. And when you did something like you couldn't pay your wage or whatever it may be to teach you a lesson, they'd take you and they would drop you in the tank and screw the top back on. And they'd leave you hang out there for a little bit. They said, so that's an option that they may do to you, or that you would just disappear. And they'd put you in a barrel, and then they'd roll you out back, and they'd set it on fire. And I was like, what? So I didn't know all that. In fact, I'm sitting here having this conversation, and I'm like, and I have this smile on my face the whole time, and I'm like, yeah, right? And then all of a sudden, my friend, he became a good friend of mine. He was my translator. His name was Benito. I called him Benny. Benny comes showing up, and he sits next to me, and I'm like, what is he saying? I think he said this, and I think he said this, and I kind of gave him a little bit of context, and he goes, oh, and then he explained all the things that I just shared with you. And I was like, Benny, why are you guys telling me this? You want me to come back next week? This is nuts. See, here's the challenge. When we don't speak the same language, we don't understand the full picture. Now that I have the full picture, I can do something with that information, can't I? So God is speaking a language to each and every single one of us. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is that language? How does God speak to me? So when Jesus is saying that I am the vine and you are the branches, and it's this understanding that I need to stay connected in order for me to have the ability to love people and to love God and to love myself. I mean, I cannot love God, I cannot love people, and I cannot love others if I don't stay connected to Jesus. Let me unpack this a different way. Think about it. You stay connected and you get filled up. Whatever it may be, maybe you have an experience in life and it just fills you up to the top and you feel full, you're excited, you're in a good mood. When you're in that good mood, you treat people better, don't you? Then you're in a crappy mood, right? Life has gone it's gone hard, it's tough, you feel drained, you feel like you don't have a whole lot of energy, and the next person that you talk to, you snap at. Does that make sense? It's like we all have a battery inside of us, and the more we stay connected to God, it charges it up. And the less we are connected to God, it drains out. And when it drains out, we don't have the ability to love God, love people, and love others. And so tonight we're talking about what does it look like to stay connected so that we may have the ability to treat people the way that God is wanting us to. When we stand up here on stage and I say, God is asking us to love the world with no condition at all, so that the world may know that Jesus is real, the only way we can do it is if we stay connected. And the question tonight, what does it look like for you and for me to stay connected? And so tonight in small group, we're going to do something different. And I've put together an opportunity for you to walk through this exercise, and you should walk away tonight understanding your language. That's the goal, is that you walk away understanding how God speaks to you, how he connects to you, so that in life you could create opportunities to connect and to recharge. Let me pray for us. And as I pray, I'll invite the band. Dear God, we thank you so much for this night.